Good morning, everyone. It's nice to see you today. And I'm going to do something a little different, as you can see. But let me give some background first. For over 40 years, I was involved in teaching international relations at the university. And even before that, as a little boy, I took a very deep interest for reasons I'm not fully sure I understand. But even as a 9 and 10-year-old boy, I used to read the daily newspaper. We had two in those days back in Buffalo. Every single day, I would read about world events. And even as a young boy, trying to sort through all of the things going on in the world and trying to make some sense out of it. So I gave the topic title today, What in the World is Going On? What in the world is going on? If you've been watching the news the last few weeks, there's actually been something more going on than just an airplane going missing. There's major international events taking place in Central Europe. There's major international events taking place in Africa, in Venezuela. This is a time really of a great deal of turmoil and change in the world. And what I'd like to do is share with you a presentation that I used with my students for many years to take a look at this topic, because I feel my thinking about this, which preceded my introduction to the Church of Religious Science, is very consistent with our teaching. And I think our teaching offers many important insights, especially as we go ahead into this 21st century. So hopefully I can muster enough wind power. Thank you, Joe. Some days it's easier than others. Now, let me just start with a very simple little thing. Since it's Joe's birthday, we better put Joe right here with a dot. And we'll put Bob and Marie here. We'll put Mandy, and we'll put Becky here, and we'll put Bill, and everyone else. We'll give you a little spot on this circle. Now, ideally, I would be able to find, remember those snow globes we had as children, where you took them, shook them up, and tipped them upside down, and flipped them over, and then little snowflakes would come down on Santa Claus or the reindeer? Well, that would be a better representation than what I'm able to do with this milky colored balloon, because when we think about the universe, it really would resemble that snowball. That is, there's not only an external surface, but internally there are heavenly bodies in motion, okay, and in continual motion. Now, if you've been watching the Cosmos show that's been on the last 2 Sunday nights and is continuing in a series, they estimate, and there was some very important scientific evidence presented this week, that our universe was created from a big bang. That is, all the matter and energy was condensed down to the size of a sand kernel and then exploded at an extremely rapid rate. And we are able, with our human instrumentations, to look out to the edge of this surface, and our understanding of light waves and other kind of waves and how fast they move, We estimate our universe is 13.8 billion years old since the Big Bang. Now, what is interesting by starting putting heavenly bodies on the out surface of this miniature allegorical universe is something extremely important related to religious science becomes present. Ernest Holmes said, "The center is present everywhere, the circumference nowhere." And let me show you how this works. So, Marie's standing here, Eloise is here, Mandy's here, and so forth. Now, picture yourself on one of those spots, and when I blow the balloon up, every spot moves away at the same rate and distance as every other spot. So no matter where you are, when you look out at the universe, everything seems to be moving away from you at the same pace. The center is everywhere, the circumference is nowhere. And that is literally the case, and we can determine that by what is called the red light shift. That is, when light moves away from the observer, it has a reddish tint. And so when we look out with our powerful instruments into the night sky at other galaxies and far distant heavenly bodies, they appear with a red light shift. Okay? And so this immense universe, our thought, our processes in this religion does not reject this 13.8 billion immense expanding universe with a center everywhere and a circumference nowhere. As you know, our cousins scattered elsewhere around this community on Sunday morning, many of them go into apoplexy when they try to wrap their brains around it because it does not fit some documentation that they take as the only and exclusive interpretation of the universe, if I may be so candid to state. Okay? Now, as a person interested in trying to figure out what in the world is going on, we have to begin with nature. Okay? Our natural setting here on Earth, again, appropriately represented by this globe-like shape. Now, in international relations, there's a couple of extremely important things that we have to think about. The first is the hydrosphere, the water system. The water system is quite complex, actually. Our oceans are conveyor belts of energy. Our currents are extremely important, and all of the oceans are linked by a current system. So, for example, the Gulf of Mexico, the Gulf Stream, warm water heats up in the summer, comes out of the Gulf, flows up along the coast of the eastern United States, heads up to Newfoundland and around Iceland, and then comes down onto Europe. And why is countries like Britain and Spain and so warm? When you look at how high they are, they're way up there by Canada. But it's because of the ocean's currents. Now, the ocean's currents function as a result of the density of the salt in the water. So when the salt is denser, cooler water drops, and when the salt is less dense, it rises. So when we hear these concerns about the melting of the polar ice caps, it's because all of that trapped fresh water will go into the ocean, dilute the salinity, and change the conveyor belt that moves the climate around the world as we know. And so when I'm thinking about international events, the effects on climate that human activity have become extremely important. Another key element in understanding our international affairs is the atmosphere. Our atmosphere. And that is, air currents move material around the world as well. So when someone turns on a coal-fired power plant outside of Chicago, the pollutant of that goes up into the air, is carried up into Ontario, mixes with lightning and rain and so forth, drops to the ground as acid rain, leaches out the metals that are in the soils, particularly aluminum, which goes into the waterways and kills the fish. So we have to understand the atmosphere and how it moves as part of our global understanding. Now, let's quickly add another element into this mixture. People. People. Now, in the year 1700, 314 years ago, there was an estimated 700 million people in the entire world population, about twice as many as there are now Americans. Only 700 million people in the year 1700. By 1945, at the end of the Second World War, this population had tripled to 2 billion. There was an estimated 2 billion people in the world in the year 1945. Between 1945 and 1980, it tripled again to 6 billion. Today, we're well over 7 billion. Now, if I live to be 100, 1944 to 2044, so I live 30 more years, not totally improbable, certainly in the life of my children, we are going to go to 8.5 to 10 billion people. 1945, when most of us were twinkles in our parents' eyes or young children, there were 2 billion. In our lifetime, we have grown to 7,200,000,000. If we have the good fortune of long lives of another generation, we will live to see between 8.5 and 10 billion. There is nothing like this comparable in history. Now, the reason I use the paint is that when you add people to nature and then you accelerate at an unprecedented rate, the distinction between nature is some sort of preserve out there in some corner of the world that's untouched by human behavior, and human interaction disappears. We no longer have yellow paint and blue paint. We're beginning to see this merge of a greenish tone. That is, nature and humanity cannot be separated. We live in this intimate link, and the way we measure it is called carrying capacity. So imagine you're driving down the hill to Chico, and there you get into that kind of dry countryside. We measure out an acre of land, and we harvest all the plants and animals, and we bring them to a dehydrator, and we dehydrate them, and we measure it. And we can determine the natural carrying capacity of that particular type of landscape. Compare that if we went up to the forest in Lassen Park, took another acre, cut all those big trees down, harvested those big animals, dehydrate them and weigh them. Obviously, the carrying capacity, where there's lots of rain and sunshine, is heavier. Now what happens, because you're adding all these human beings to the planet, we no longer live within our natural carrying capacity. So we invent things like a hoe, or we start selecting seeds, or we develop irrigation ditches. We do things to increase the carrying capacity of the land beyond its natural state in order to support the huge population. Now, what is taking place around the world is that there's not enough food growing in many areas to support the population. Japan, the second or third most prosperous country on the earth, cannot feed itself. It lives beyond its current carrying capacity and has to import not only food but oil. And we see these patterns all around the world. There are only 5 or 6 countries out of 200 and some that have enough surplus food to export and share with other people. The United States, Australia, Thailand, Argentina, and France are the major food exporters. Okay? The world is far more dependent on a few sources of food than it is on limited sources of fuel. Now, geography in this man-nature relationship is very important. Where you live counts. Geography counts. Some people are blessed to live near freshwater resources where there's ample rain, there's good topsoil, the weather is reasonably predictable, there's not extreme events. Other people live on margins. The deserts are growing, the groundwater is being overpumped, the weather patterns bringing rain are changing. Their life circumstances are much different than those of us living in the Sacramento Valley. Now let's add a third element to this balloon, and that is what I call social structures. What are the nature of our social structures, how we organize ourselves? Historically, we were for tens of thousands of years hunters and gatherers. We lived within pretty much the natural carrying capacity. As the seasons changed, our little tribal bands, which our ancestors were all a part of, had to move. They moved with the weather and the climate. They followed herds of wild animals to hunt for them. Then, as we begin to develop seeds and begin to domesticate animals, and this took place in the Fertile Crescent around the Tigris and Euphrates rivers, the Garden of Eden, this knowledge spreads outward and moves with people. Now, our contemporary social structure is really, truly unique because we are living in the hydrocarbon age. We've all heard people talk about the Stone Age and the Bronze Age and the Steel Age. Well, what do we call our age? It's the hydrocarbon age. Our entire lifestyle is based upon oil and natural gas. Plastics comes from hydrocarbons. Our energy to heat our homes, our energy to run our automobiles, every single aspect, including our clothing, our food, our transportation, our building materials, all are hydrocarbon based. And this has happened in less than 100 years. We switched from coal and wood to hydrocarbon. Now, just like geography plays an impact on where we grow food and where are hospitable places to live, fossil fuels, especially oil and natural gas, are not randomly distributed around the world. We live in an age of high rates of consumption. Every week, someone comes up to a truck in front of our house and takes away our garbage. Some of it to be recycled, other to the landfill. Multiply that by 7 billion people. And you begin to see that the stress of our 7 billion people living in a world that emphasizes the consumption, using hydrocarbons, oil and natural gas, to maintain our civilization, and you begin to have a difficult time to see unaffected nature. It begins to disappear, making it quite difficult. Then add in some other interesting things about our social structures. In many places in the world, little boys are much more valued than little girls. And we now have the knowledge and skill to know prior to the delivery of a fetus whether that is going to be a boy or a girl, and families consciously intervene to abort their baby daughters. And in many places like India and China, there's a huge surplus of boys. There are simply not enough girls to go around to marry every boy. And so what happens in this social structure where there's uneven fresh water, uneven topsoil, uneven fuel, we have lots of angry young horny men. And you know how they behave. They run in packs. And they're dangerous. Let me see what else I got on here, just a couple things. Now, two critical things in this relationship between social structure and nature are the production of food and the production of fuel. And in both situations here, we see serious stresses on this system. We used to have 10, 15 years ago a year's worth of grain in reserve as surplus. Now we're down in the world system to a few weeks of surplus grain. Is one person, one really notable expert, Lester Brown, I had the opportunity to have a brief conversation with him a couple of years ago. He's, he questioned me back, well, how do things change? How do things change? And he said, well, things can change very quickly. Just think about cigarettes. 20 years ago, the cigarette lobby had the most muscle of any lobby in Washington, D.C. What politician now wants to be photographed standing next to a lobbyist from the tobacco industry handing him or her a check? Smoking behavior has changed dramatically in this country. And so Lester Brown argued, yeah, things do change quickly. So then the questions I asked him, well, what will change things radically in the world? He said, a simultaneous drought in India and in the United States where there's a big shortfall of wheat. Because he said, then the Chinese will come in and buy our bread. And that will really disrupt the system because they have excess dollars in their treasury from the trade deficit. They will outbid us for our own bread. He said that would be the event. A simultaneous dual drought in one summer will so tax the food system that it'll cause rapid, dramatic change. Now, this little system here, this little allegory, I think there's a couple of critical points. The first thing is that everything is connected. You no longer see red, blue, and yellow paint. You see kind of this brown color. That's the first thing. The second thing is if you change one thing, a big volcano or a couple big volcanoes, and we have experienced this in modern history. Right around 1900, there was a huge volcano, and it was the year without summer. Okay, the weather was so bad around the world that crops failed everywhere, particularly in the higher areas like New England and in Europe, and there was widespread famine. I believe early in the 20th century, my father, who was born in 1904, talked about another volcanic eruption in the Pacific that affected the weather all around the world, that you couldn't see the sun clearly through the haze that covered the entire Earth's surface. And again, it was a very cold summer with a lot of crop failures. So change one thing and everything changes. Okay? Everything is connected. One thing changes, everything changes. And we cannot predict, because of the creative nature of the universe, where the changes will take place. There are spontaneous mutants, okay? That the universe by its nature is creative and change-oriented. Nothing is stable. Everything is in motion continually. It would be like I had a big couple of paintbrushes swirling around here. And what I find interesting, and this is really a modern model that comes from both physics and biology, it's identical to what Ernest Holmes teaches. It's identical to what Ernest Holmes teaches. And we had this Buddhist monk sitting up here on the chair on Wednesday night, giving out these little healing necklaces. He made the assertion that Buddhism shares more in common with modern science than any other religion. And when our teaching in Buddhism does not correspond to the latest insights in science, we change our teaching. We don't fight it, we don't resist it, we don't burn the heretics at the stake. We try to learn from this observation because Buddhism is based on observing the natural world. And Ernest Holmes tried to align his thinking with the latest scientific thinking to merge theology, philosophy, psychology, and science. Now, I want to add one more element to this. And I'm going to call this element the meta. We're metaphysicians. Meta is a prefix that means all those things beyond. And so I want to talk about what are those things that make human beings beyond pure animals. Our ability to make music, our artistic abilities, our spiritual sense, our intellectual capabilities, our language, our printed word. that we are more than our chimpanzee cousins, even though we share 99% of the same DNA. There is something different about us. Now, it's easy to slip into, when you're watching too much television news, into kind of a doomsday mentality. And I've had to fight this because of my interest in this for 60-some years to resist this. And this teaching, when I came to it in the late 1980s, really helped reinforce that more optimistic point of view, because we state categorically, change your thinking, change your life. Ideas have power. We are always praying. Our thoughts are prayers. We are always praying. Our thoughts have power. Let me just give you one, for instance, an example. In 1952 in this country, over 52,000 children had polio. My brothers Bill and David were two of the 52,000. My father was another member of that group that summer. Polio was a scourge. In 1985, 360,000 people succumbed to polio. That's 1,000 people a day. You know what the common cause of death for people who survive polio? Snake bites. Because they live in poor places and they can't walk and are on the dirt and they die from snake bites. 365,000 a year. Then someone, the president of Rotary International, says, I have an idea. We have the know-how. We have not yet mustered the wherewithal to eliminate polio in our lifetime. And so Rotary raised the money and the volunteers and worked with the Center for Disease Control and the World Health Organization. And last year there were 200 cases of polio in the world. The power of an idea. No little child should ever again have to suffer from polio. As my one brother said when some redneck was telling him about many years ago, well, kids just aren't sick enough and don't suffer enough. My brother turned and looked at him and said, I had polio and it did not do me a damn bit of good. The power of an idea. Another idea. Most of us in our generation have this funny little scar on our shoulder from smallpox. Smallpox is eliminated, the greatest scourge in humanity. When Europeans first made contact with the Western Hemisphere, within a few years, a few generations, 95% of the Western Hemisphere's population died because of contact with European diseases. Disease killed native populations of both South America and North America. And smallpox was the major one. A smallpox epidemic in Rome in the year 165 during Marcus Aurelius' period killed 30% of the population, 10% of the military, and led to the fall of Rome. Disease is a powerful thing. And the notion we do not have to live with this is a powerful idea. Now, what is the other powerful ideas? We are all God's children. You know, there's a real tendency among human beings, I think it's part of our human nature, that we tend to really protect our group that we identify and hold at a distance those people who are not part of us. We have a us and them mentality. We're seeing that. The people in the Ukraine have been living together for 50 years and now they suddenly want to kill each other? They're intermarried at an extraordinary rate. And then suddenly this primitive nerve by this jerk in the Kremlin gets twisted and they turn against each other. How can that be? How can we get an idea that overcomes this sense of separation and duality and I'm better than you and my skin color is preferable to your skin color? That is a powerful idea. And in our lifetime, we've had the powerful idea of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, that all human beings have dignity and rights. You go back and read history even 100 years ago, and that notion is absent. Women didn't have the right to vote in this country 100 years ago. And to have a notion that every human being has dignity and rights, that is a powerful idea. And because of our Bill of Rights in America, I don't think we pay enough attention to the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. It is what gives courage to so many oppressed people that there's this notion out there. And so we have this model. We cannot predict the future by knowing the past. A creative universe with spontaneous mutants makes it impossible to accurately predict. We can't predict the weather more than 3 days in advance with all of our knowledge. But we can see the power of this inner complexity, this mix and relationship between our social structure, and do we need to modify and change the social structure so we're not spewing chemicals and products into the air that warm the earth and change the climate? Are we smart enough to make those changes? Are we smart enough to embrace and love those less fortunate of different colored skin? These are powerful ideas. Now, what I used to do in class, but I won't do it here in church, I used to take this. And I also would talk that there's some bad ideas out there. And Holmes reminds us, good ideas, bad ideas, both have the law behind them. Okay? We can build an atomic bomb, or we can eliminate smallpox. And the future of the universe really depends now. You're still awake. The future of the universe really depends now on thought. On thought. And what teaching emphasizes more the power of creative thought than metaphysics and the teaching of science mind? What in the world is going on? We are at the center of history. Never before have 8 billion people consuming fossil fuels at an incredible rate, eliminating nature, changing our climate, been in greater need for a new idea and a new concept. And I hope so very much that this national organization and the merger can get its act together to be a clear and strong voice. At the Silmar 2 summers ago, the president of the new organization said, "A world that works for everyone." That to me is a powerful idea, but I've never received anything in the mail from that organization that I give money to every year when I sign up for my membership. They're invisible. We have to become a visible force, speaking our truth about oneness of humanity, the complexity of the relationships that with the world we live in, the need to protect our relationship between the social structures and nature, and that the future is not easily predicted, that we have to do a better job in getting new ideas to meet the challenges of our time.